skipping your AC tune-up this year? Think again. Don't spend another season hoping your air conditioner works. Be sure with help from the team at Legacy. An annual tune-up keeps your AC running safely and efficiently when you need it most. Avoid costly repairs, breakdowns, and keep your AC running for years to come. Visit LegacyHeatingandAirInc.com for easy online scheduling and special offers and discounts. While you're there, sign up for an annual maintenance plan starting at just $13 a month and leave the worry to us.
Welcome to Football Never Sleeps, the weekly aspiring to be viral football show all about Notre Dame football. And if I could say football one more in that sentence, I'd really be hitting it hard. My name is Eric Hansen. The guy in the other Brady Bunch square is Bob Morton, former Notre Dame offensive lineman. I called him Delta Airlines Chaos Survivor. He's the current survivor of that. And we're here to talk with you and take your questions tonight. Some of you have already started to file those in, so we really appreciate those. We will be with you for the next hour, and we're brought to you by Legacy Heating and Air. We're taking stock of Notre Dame football a week out from the start of preseason training camp, which is next Wednesday, July 31st. Notre Dame remains at 86 scholarship players, one over the limit as we're 7 days away from the start of camp with a 9:30 a.m. Eastern time practice that will be open to the media, completely open. That's the only one we get. We'll get some partials though. That will be followed by a press conference with head coach Marcus Freeman at noon-ish. And then players are set to report back on Tuesday. As a reminder, to help us conquer the YouTube algorithm, please like, subscribe, and share this video. And Tyler James, who's still on vacation, but will be back on Monday. He will be happy that I said that. We also have a free trial. I'm going to promote that at the end of the show, a 30-day free trial, so stick around for that. And Bob, we're going to start our opening drive with possibly premature, but definitely bold preseason predictions. So I made 24 of these in a column for the 2024 season and beyond, a column that's available right now on InsideNDSports.com. We're going to narrow that list down considerably since Bob has 4 minor children to supervise. And we'll add a bonus prediction that I didn't previously make. So I'm going to go with Bob's predictions first and then mine in each category. And we will get to your questions. We're going to work these in during the course of the show. So our first one is Notre Dame's regular season record for 2024. What say you, Bob?
What say me? You know, I typically come in on the pessimistic side of realism when it comes to records, just in terms of there's so much that goes into a season. Looking at last year's season, I thought the schedule, just with the number of teams that had bye weeks before us and our poorly timed bye weeks, were really going to be hard for us to not lose a couple of games. I like our schedule this year. We've got a lot of home games. We've got a lot of games that are going to feel like home games, even though they're on the road. I do think that there's a slip in there somewhere, and I don't know if that's just because, you know, we are looking too far ahead. We're licking our wounds. We have an injury that happens. So I feel like we're on the close side of 11-1. I could see this team running the table. I think the talent's all there. I think the question for me is week 1, are we going to gel offensively enough? And then are we going to be able to really keep that locomotive kind of rolling through the grind of the middle of the season? I think one kind of grabs us and snags us, but I think we win all but one of them.
I went with 11-1 too, and I can't tell you which game I think they'll drop. I just think there's one game where it's not going to go their way. And I think that the Irish can afford the loss and still host a first-round playoff game. So the difference between 12-0 and 11-1 isn't going to be a big difference, I don't think, in their seeding, unless it were to be maybe the USC game or Virginia really late in the season. And then maybe that affects their seed, maybe a spot or two. But
Yeah, I agree with you. And I actually think maybe the difference between 12-0 and 11-1 for me is going to come down to how locked in Steve Angeli is throughout the year. You might ask this a little bit later. Dare I say, I know you're going to ask this a little bit later about quarterbacks. But if Riley Leonard's the starting quarterback to start this year and what he brings to the table and what kind of we've seen from him through the summer, he rolls an ankle, he tweaks a knee, has a shoulder, gets tackled the wrong way. We might have a quarter or a half to finish a game where Steve Angeli comes in. And is he going to be the quarterback that we know he can be? He can start in 100 programs throughout this country. Yeah. And so if he's not starting with us, will he be able to get that win? Or will we maybe drop that one because things don't go our way at the end of the game?
Okay. Before we get to the next one, I'm going to go on a little side journey because I know you were committed to Texas A&M at a point. You're from McKinley, Texas, if I remember that right.
Yeah, McKinney. Drop the L.
McKinney. Okay, McKinney. I try to turn it into a presidential city. McKinney. And so I would imagine you've been to Kyle Field?
I have, yeah, several times.
Okay, so what's that atmosphere like, and what's the heat in Texas like on August 31st in general?
Yeah, let's put it this way. One of the first conversations I had when Coach Denbrock came back into town was to say, hey, listen, I know you guys have experience, but if you need former players who have been at Kyle Field to come talk about that atmosphere, let me know, because it's weird, right? Like Texas football is crazy in and of itself. Just because of the caliber of athletes you have, the heat, obviously, towns shut down for these games. But you don't just have roaring fans like you do everywhere. It's not just the decibel meter like it is at the Big House or, at Penn State or anywhere else. You have they have hand signals that go up the entire side of a stadium, and then they chant all at the same time. So it is 50,000 people saying the same thing at the same time. You can hear what they're saying just with 50,000 voices. It's a crazy atmosphere that just kind of gets in your head a little bit. And so I think the team really has to be ready. Historically, even when Coach Denbrock ran the offense here, when Coach Kelly was running the offense here, we have been really poor when we've used a silent count. We will need to figure that out early this year, or our offense is going to just be kind of slogging through the mud a little bit. We've got to be able to handle the noise. In terms of the heat, it can go both ways. We could have a really hot fall camp and it could cool off that evening, but statistically, we're going to feel like it's really hot and muggy here. Yeah. Our players are going to feel like they're ready for it. And then they're going to get off the plane in College Station, and that humidity is just going to punch them right in the mouth. And so we not only have to have our best foot forward, but our twos and our threes, our depth chart has to be ready to go in for anywhere from 2 to 15 plays just to make sure we're not getting cramped out on the field.
Okay, last Texas A&M question before we move to the next one. What's this thing that they go like this, that they look like they've had too much bourbon? Do you even know what that is?
Well, that's probably them just having too much bourbon, Eric.
Okay. So I've seen it. I mean, like the coaches and the athletic directors have done it at functions, and I'm like, what in the world is that?
I don't particularly know that. I just know that
you weren't committed long enough to find out the secret.
Yeah, no, I got out of there pretty quick. So
okay. All right, we will move on to the second question: offensive and defensive MVPs.
I think offensive MVP is going to be the quarterback. I think Riley Leonard is going to be the one, the glue that kind of holds the offense together. I'd love to see, a running back or a receiver, even a tight end climb up there. But I think the strength of this team is that it's not just one receiver that's a game breaker, but you've got 3 or 4 that could be game changers. It's not just one running back that makes this team, but a stable of them. It's not just one tight end, even though Mitch Evans could be arguably the best in the country, but you've got, 2 or 3 that can really make a difference for you. I think the one game changer that you have is the person who's going to be touching the ball every single play. And so I think that for me, he's going to be the offensive MVP. On defense, I'm going to go Xavier Watts again, not because I think he's necessarily going to have as many interceptions as he did last year. though he might. I think that when a team is operating at its best, there are really 3-4 positions that could be highlighted. One is going to be your best rush defensive end who can get pressure on the quarterback, but I feel like our defensive line is going to rush really well as a unit. The other is, do you have a guy who's going to get you 150 tackles? I think we have too much of a rotation to have that guy. And then it's the back end. Are you going to have, if Benjamin Morrison ends up with 6 interceptions, he's the guy, right? If not, your team is built to get pressure on the quarterback, and your free safety has shown the ability to go hawk after that ball. And so my gut just tells me he's going to have a repeat of last year and keep rising his stock.
Okay, I'm sure Xavier will be happy to hear that. I think when I did in the spring, and I wouldn't change a lot of these right now, but I did the top 24 players that I thought in order, and I'm starting on the defensive side. I had Ben Morrison, the number 1 player on the team, and Watts number 2. And I think in terms of MVP, Watts' stats are going to lend itself, like you said, more to the MVP. And that's a lot what people were saying about Benjamin Morrison last year. They were like, well, gosh, what happened to him? Well, it wasn't so much Ben Morrison's stats that were eye-catching. It was when you looked at the stats of the guys that he was covering, like Marvin Harrison Jr. against that. That's where you have to kind of, and maybe Notre Dame, when they, promote him for some of these awards, like the Thorpe Award and stuff, need to highlight that. And I'm sure they know how to do that.
Absolutely.
Don't need my help, but just in case they're watching tonight, I deserve a little assist there. And so I'm going to go with Ben Morrison, but I don't know that it's going to go that way. I still think he's just the best player on the team, but that doesn't mean he'll win the MVP. And I am going to go with Riley Leonard on offense. So we agree there so far. So we're very agreeable. So yeah, we're in sync. Now we're going to go to freshman of the year.
Yeah, I sang his praises the last time I was on the show. I think KVA, Kingston Viliamu-Asa, has an opportunity to be a game changer. I just have not seen a freshman with that kind of instincts from tackle to tackle. I didn't see him a lot in coverage. I'm going to assume the number of stars he has after his name is going to be that he can play the position front to back pretty well. But I think when you look at who's going to be a contributor, who has the ability to contribute really early, I think KVA could really help solidify this defense in a lot of ways, being able to really sniff things out when you've got such a great D-line taking on blocks.
Yeah, he is also mine. He has outside linebacker skills and inside linebacker size and instincts, and that's a really dangerous combination. We had this little luncheon with Marcus Freeman, kind of informal. We were able to interview him for maybe 45 minutes, and then it was all off the record stuff. But he was asked about Kingston Viliamu-Asa, and somebody goes, "Do you think he's going to be able to make a dent this year?" And Marcus almost laughed. He was like, "Oh!" It was like I wanted to quote that noise, but I didn't know how to spell it. So, but he has a very high opinion of him. The guy that I think surprised them with how quickly he's ascending is Bryce Young at the strong side defensive end. Although I don't know that he's going to have as much opportunity as Kingston either. I think both of those guys are going to have big years, and there's a lot of guys that might have really good roles. But the Kingston Viliamu-Asa's in the position to timeshare with Drake Bowen, who had a great spring, is just amazing to me. So yeah, we agree on that one. We are agreeable so far.
We're locked in, huh?
We're locked in. Okay, the trap game.
I think so. We both have kind of one loss for the team. We don't know where it's going to come from. I think going into College Station week 1 doesn't feel like it's a trap game. I think we're going to be ready for it. Will we handle the elements of the humidity? Will we handle the crowd noise? Win or lose, I don't think that's a trap. I'm gonna give an interesting trap game because it shouldn't be a trap game. But week 5, 5th straight game, Louisville coming to our house after not a sexy game plan, just thumping us last year. I think that we view ourselves as so much better than we were last year, and they did not carry out their success through the year. And I think it's very easy for us to potentially read 5 weeks of headlines and forget what they did in their house last year. And so I'm going to call Louisville the trap game because they're still an up-and-coming team. I don't think players necessarily view them as like worthy of a top-tier ranking, but it will make their season, and it will continue Coach Jeff Brom's progress at Louisville to not just beat us one year, but to go back-to-back against us. We've got to get out of week 5 with the win.
I consider Louisville, and I think that's a good one, and that game's going to be only on Peacock, which already has people mad.
Yeah.
I went with Georgia Tech in October, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit. It's around midterm week, which usually is a pretty difficult week for the players. Georgia Tech was sneaky okay last year. They were 7-6. They were competitive in almost every game. They somehow lost to Bowling Green early in the year, and then they whomped UCF in their bowl game. And before that, they had their rivalry game with Georgia, and that was an 8-point game with Georgia Tech having a chance to pull even in that game. So their defense isn't very good, or it wasn't last year. Their offense was really good last year. Notre Dame's defense is so good, but if they got into a turnover game, and that game's in the Falcons Stadium and not where Georgia Tech typically plays, that's a Mercedes-Benz stadium. So that was my trap game. But Louisville has 31 transfers. They had a big number last year. They have another big number this year. So that kind of is a big variable. So I like your pick there.
You just don't know how the team's going to really gel together, and you got to look at how a coach, over the course of time has pulled a team together. And I think that's why Florida State and Louisville are potentially tough games. They don't look good on the schedule right now, but by the time we play them, we might see them as more top-tier talented teams because they have experienced coaches who have brought different teams at different levels together. Just kind of touching base on what you said about spring break week, I actually think it is beneficial for Notre Dame, or fall break week, for Notre Dame to play at Georgia Tech during fall break than to host Georgia Tech at Notre Dame during fall break. As a player and even as a fan, I think that there's something deflating about when you show up to Notre Dame Stadium and there's just a thinner student body presence and a quieter crowd in general. I think that being able to go where we're gonna sell out 50% of Mercedes-Benz Stadium, if not more. We've got a contingent down there, and it's really our only game that we can pull in the Southeast this year. I do think that it's going to be a really good crowd and a great atmosphere. I think it'll be a better atmosphere than if we had that game at Notre Dame Stadium that same week.
Love that you guys are filling up the queue with questions and comments. We're going to get to them at the end of doing our own predictions, which is going to be pretty soon. We got 3 more left. And this one, I think, is one that Bob has been looking forward to. The player who will boost his 2025 NFL draft stock / equity the most. I only put the / in there because everybody calls it draft stock, so I try to call it something different.
There we go. We just got to be contrarians, come up with a new word.
Right.
So somebody that we haven't really talked about my few episodes on the show, I'm going to say Riley Mills has the opportunity to really jump up some draft boards. If you've ever shook hands with Riley Mills, I don't think there's anybody more physically impressive on Notre Dame's team. Reminds you of a J.J. Watt type build. And so had a really quiet start to the year last year. I think started really coming around and making some of the tackles he was missing towards the end of the year. But when you look at the way the front of our defense is built, I think you've held pat and gotten better because of experience across the board. You bring in RJ Oben, who's going to be a solid contributor off the edge. You've got Jordan Botello, at the Viper position there. Obviously, I think people will game plan a little bit more for Howard Cross III. A 3 technique is a sneaky position where he can kind of be a strong end or a quicker tackle on the guards, and he's going to have a lot of one-on-one matchups with that guard. And I think that he could do really, really well, especially if we get to a point in the season where we have like Jalen Sneed lining up on the line as well. If you get edge pressure, it can be a field day for your 3 technique. So I just expect the system to allow Riley to live up to the hype that I've had for him for a couple of years now.
I think that's a great pick, and he was my second choice. And my first choice I went with was the other Riley, and that's Leonard.
Yeah.
And I did that because last year going into the season, before he had some injury problems and a little bit of inconsistency too, you saw him in those early preseason mocks where people were mentioning him as a possible first or second round draft pick if he developed, and he didn't take a step forward last year in his development, largely because he was injured, but he didn't. And I think because he's of his position, he could go from a guy that's, just kind of, he's interesting to somebody that climbs the boards if he can show off that passing game. He's got the size, he's got the big arm. He needs to get a lot more accurate. But Jaden Daniels' stats at Arizona State, his last year there, were not as good as Riley Leonard's when in 2022 when Riley was a sophomore. So, and then Jaden Daniels just exploded under Mike Denbrock's offense and Brian Kelly at LSU. And certainly Jaden deserves a lot of credit there. He was a talented guy to begin with. So to me, that's the really interesting one. But I do agree with you. I think Mills can help himself a lot. And there's going to be somebody that comes off the radar that we're not thinking about. If you look at the early mocks, Ben Morrison is the consensus best pro prospect on the team in a first rounder. But then there starts to be some disagreement about where Watts would fall, where Cross would fall, and some of these other guys. So it's going to be really interesting to me.
Yeah. We'll talk about Riley Leonard a little bit more later, but I think the danger when you talk about a dual threat running mobile quarterback is that you forget the danger that they can be when they're in the pocket. And I know there were no pads, and I know there was no pass rush, but when he went down there and started throwing dimes at the Manning passing camp, I think that was a little bit of a wake-up call that he's got a lot of the skills that you would desire for your dream quarterback. And so we've got our dream coordinator and our dream quarterback for this year. If those two things come together and we give him some time, I think that, again, the system and the player, it's kind of opportunity and preparation, right? Like if you can meld those two things together, we could be hearing his name really early, come next April.
Okay. We are going to go to offensive lineman of the year next, and then we'll do the last question about next year's quarterback. So offensive lineman of the year.
Yeah.
I'm going to defer to whoever you pick, but I have my pick.
Wow. I was looking at him, and I think that it could go a lot of different ways. I think similarly to an earlier conversation, I think there's a difference between who's going to be the best and who would be the MVP, right? Because your MVP is somebody who, without that person, you wouldn't be able to really put it together. So it could be like a Charles Jagasa. It could be whoever ends up. Could be Tosh Baker, who holds off Emil for the entirety of the season. It could be any of those guys who are dealing with the defensive ends a lot of the time. I will say, going into the bowl game last year, I was excited to see Ashton Craig play the position of center again. And I wanted to see him be the starting center this year, and he is. I will say my offensive lineman of the year will come down between Ashton and Billy Schrouth, and I'm going to give the nod to the guy who starts every play snapping the ball and say Ashton Craig's my guy.
Wow. Okay. I think Ashton had an incredibly good spring. I mean, he made it so that there wasn't even a discussion about, well, who else could we put here?
Yeah.
It was just like, but, and I think some of it is kind of the Bam Bam, cartoon Bam Bam aspect of it. But I'm going to go with Billy Schrauth. He just has some Quentin Nelson qualities in terms of just brute strength. And he's, I mean, technically sound. I mean, he gets it. He got his second chance last year when there was an injury. He came in and started the last handful of games, and he's just taken it and run with it. But I really like Billy Schrauth. But I do like Ashton Craig. Those two are the ones that I don't think are going to get challenged at all.
Yeah, well, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of running game we really settle into, right? Like, I think that, the past several years, and I think in our heyday with Nelson, McGlinchey, and those guys, we did really well getting our guards and even our tackles on the outside and getting folks, getting them pulling and into open space, because they were not just were they All-Americans, in the phone booth, but they were elite when they were running, towards linebackers as well. If Coach Denbrock wants to get guards pulling, and Billy Schrauth does a great job on that, he will clearly take over as the premier lineman, because he's always going to be leading the way. If we're going to stay more inside zone, less pulling out wide, I think then your center becomes just a more central guard who has one extra job. And I think if you stay inside there, you're going to see those two kind of battle it out for the premier spot of the O-line MVP, according to Bob. And so I think it's, again, let's see how the system plays out, and how much of Mike Denbrock's offense are we going to be able to see in year one with the personnel that we have? That's the big question for me.
Okay. Well, your last question in this segment, and then we're going to get to the ones from our viewers, is who is the quarterback in 2025? And to remind our viewers who would be in play for that, if nobody hits the transfer portal, nobody decommits, nobody gets abducted by aliens, it would be Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchey, CJ Carr, and then a incoming freshman, Deuce Knight. So those are the choices.
Yeah, so my crystal ball says CJ Carr. I've been impressed with all names that we mentioned. I think Kenny Minchey has done a great job of improving. I was really happy with what I saw from him in the spring. Steve Angeli has been nothing but what we could have ever asked him to be. When I saw CJ Carr get outside of the pocket, making decisions and throwing across the middle, all I can say is he looked like he was making throws that a freshman in the fall shouldn't be confident making, and he was doing that in what would have normally been the spring of his senior year of high school. And I just don't see a way to keep him off the field. I think it's going to be a great battle. I think a lot of things will go into it, but it would have to be a really special case for me to see him not as the starter in the fall next year.
Okay, we are going to go to questions from the audience. I'm trying to get some related, but I think I'm going to kind of go in a little bit of order so we're not. So if you don't mind, Bob, if we're a little bit jumping around here and
let's dance. It's all good.
Okay. Michael Collins, Bob, can you please compare and contrast playing a day and night game both at home and on the road? What will the players do during the day at A&M? Hopefully not what they did in Louisville.
Oh yeah. Listen, and it wasn't just Louisville, Michael. It felt like every night game that we were away, we came out flat. And so you're spot on. But it wasn't just Louisville. It was the week before and a couple weeks before that. We played so many night games, and it just felt like we didn't have the same oomph that we do at 3:30 Eastern at Notre Dame Stadium. So I can't tell you what our current team does, but I think what my team, specifically under Charlie, but even Ty did this as well, is we didn't operate based on hours of the day. We operated on a clock of T-minus. Right, T-minus this many hours till kickoff. And so if we had a 3:30 kickoff, then, we would have a wake-up call at 8 or 8:30. We would get breakfast, and then we'd be back in our room for a little bit. But then at T-minus 5 hours, we were having meetings in the hotel. T-minus 4 hours, we were getting on the bus so we could go to mass. T-minus whatever. Everything was just getting us close to the kickoff. And then if we had an 8 o'clock kickoff, we would have breakfast available to us, but then we would have free time to rest, to stretch, to work with trainers, to get treatment. And we didn't really start our day until T-minus 5.5, 6 hours before kickoff. And so you could literally plug your morning routine into the afternoon of a night game to get the same emphasis and the same rhythm in your mind to get ready for kickoff. So for a night game, whether you're on the road or you're at home, you're just sliding that schedule a little bit in your mind. And I think it works pretty well for the most part. I think I just saw Ray Jean put it on for August 31st, hydrate. And I can't stress that enough. Like, I think that one of the biggest keys for this fall camp is going to be to make sure that we are fully hydrated. We are practicing like Eric is right now, but we're figuring out a way to make sure all of our guys are hydrated, because some people usually end up going with, they end up running dehydrated for the first month of the year, and then they kind of get back into the swing of things. You can't that Texas Heat, if you have somebody who drops in the first quarter, they are out for that game. They're not going to be coming back.
Okay. And did you ever watch other games before your game, if you were a night game?
I'd pay attention. I always loved watching like College Game Day and seeing that. I always hated seeing them talk about our games. On a bit of a tangent, if you want to know what the worst thing is about, winning a close game or losing a game at Notre Dame, it's that ESPN is going to play that replay and talk about that game 37 times, and you can't watch any sports TV because you're going to be reminded of what happened. You can't escape it. And so I always liked watching the personalities on TV, but typically, listen, I was watching like Jeopardy reruns or something, just trying to get my mind as far away from the game as I could, because when it gets to T-minus 5 hours, it takes a lot of energy to really get geeked up for a game. And so you just wanted to start from 0 and slowly creep up to 100 so you were ready for kickoff.
Okay. This next one comes from Bob from Oxnard in the Insider Lounge. How much weight do most linemen lose between the start of training camp and the last game of the regular season? Has that changed since your playing days?
Hey, Bob, I think that this is similar to a conversation that was either last week or the week before, where we just talked about, like Emil Wagner kind of building up his body weight to really get ready for the season. I think bodies change throughout the season. They don't always lose weight. What I mean by that is, like, I had to watch what I ate to not balloon to like 350 pounds. And so during the season, if I didn't keep track of what I was eating, I would gain weight and lose my conditioning that I had at the beginning of the year, where others like an Emil Wagner might lose 15 or 20 pounds if he's not focusing on his diet and making sure his protein intake is right. And so bodies kind of return to their natural caveman state over the course of the season when you're not in the weight room, 5-6 days a week. And so while I don't think there's necessarily a huge weight loss, if you have to work hard to keep weight on, you need to be cognizant of the calories in, calories out, or else you'll drop, a pound or two a week, probably on average. And then, naturally your bigger guys that are really proud of the 6-packs they have on August 1st probably won't have those 6-packs, come the end of October, just because their weight gets redistributed and they naturally get a little softer throughout the year. And so you're trying to get your body in the best shape it can be in for week 1 and let that become your base that carries you through the entire season.
Okay, this is another one from the Insider Lounge, and it's kind of broken up into 2 parts because it couldn't all fit. ND Navy 66. Bob, regarding the O-line for the first game on the road, ratty atmosphere, high floor, athletes are a premium. Later, high ceiling might be necessary to advance in the playoff. in the desirability of continuity. How do you observe that judgment or transition to take place? Did you get all that, or do I need?
I did. Yeah. I think that I do think that there's a very good chance that your week 1 starter at a position or two will not be your week 7 or 8 starter. I think that that's okay. I think that what you are doing in fall camp specifically is giving each athlete enough reps with the 1s and with the 2s to give you some continuity throughout the year. So my 4th year, Charlie Weiss's first year, I started the season as the starting center and would rotate to both guard positions and then sit down and then come back to center. And we just had a rotation. John Sullivan would come in behind me. And then later on in the year, I had an ankle injury, missed 1 week. And when I came back, I was just the backup center at that point. And then I would come in and we would kind of rotate through. Everybody knew the top 6 offensive linemen. So whether it was Santucci, Morton, Stevenson, Morton, Sullivan, Stevenson, Santucci, Sullivan, Stevenson, it didn't matter because we knew that we were going to be able to hold the rope and do the job necessary. We had that continuity built in even with transition. I think that's what they really need to build in is make sure that whoever the number 2s are get enough reps early so that if/when they are needed, it's known by their counterparts and the adjacent linemen that they're going to hold the rope and do the job necessary. But I think you're right. I think we need to make sure we have people who aren't going to proverbially and not literally pee down their leg when you've got 100,000 people chanting in unison at you in College Station, because it's going to be a pretty intense atmosphere.
I think the people doing this might do it literally. So.
It might do a little bit.
Before we get to Steve's question, I wanted to something popped in my mind from when we were talking earlier when you made your season prediction and when you brought up Charlie Weiss, it snapped. So you mentioned your prediction for that season. You were on the team in 2005 when Notre Dame was the national surprise team.
Yeah.
Going into that year, what would have been your prediction, do you think, going into that year? Did you know you guys were sneaky good? Because the people on TV, I remember Lee Corso and Kirk Herbstreit were talking about you guys might start 0-5 or 0-6. And that was a team that ended up playing in a BCS Bowl, playing in the Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah, so I thought the only game we were going to struggle to win was USC. That's what I thought.
Okay.
That's what I thought going into the year. And so that season, if I'm not wrong, part of that was I looked at what we had offensively. I thought defensively we had enough. I knew what our weaknesses were, but I thought we could outscore them. And ultimately, that season was broken up really well. Like I feel like that might have been the season we had like 4 quarters. Like we had 3 games and a bye week, 3 games and a bye week, 3 games and a bye week, then 3 games. And I can't overstate how simple some of my thoughts about a season are, that even if you have the best team, if you play 9 games in a row, you're going to lose one of those games. Either there's the exhaustion factor, like going against a team who has a bye week when you don't have a bye week is a massive thing. Dealing with recurring injuries week after week is a massive thing. And so I knew that schedule worked really well for us. And I think we dropped 1 early and then, we dropped to USC, but we were climbing through that season and still learning how to be winners again. But we went in there pretty confident. And that was some of what Charlie did, right? He wasn't Mr. Rah-Rah. He was, hey, listen, we're going to go into Pittsburgh and we're going to score on our first drive. We scored, I think, on our first play or second play. And it was a screen to Darius Walker. And he told us that was going to happen. And then when it happened, we all knew that the sky was the limit from there.
Okay, Steve wants to know, what are your thoughts on increasing team rosters to 105? How do you feel that might benefit and or hurt the Irish? So I'll go first with this and then let Bob weigh in. So today there's news. It's not official yet, but this is what it looks like is going to happen. Roster sizes in several sports is going to expand. Two of the ones that it's really going to affect a lot are baseball and football. Baseball will be able to go up to 34 scholarships. Right now, they're like at 11 or 11 and a half. And in football, you have 85 scholarships, and then you have walk-ons, and you will be able to fully fund all 105, but you will not be able to have a 106th player as a walk-on. They'll all be, 105 is going to be the limit. And so back when I first started covering college football, back when the Flintstones were living in my community, they had made a move down to 95 scholarships. Before it was, I think there was a limit. It might have been over 100. And what the really good teams would do, the power teams would do, is they would recruit sometimes kids that they knew were never going to play for them, to keep them away from teams that were ascending, teams that could eventually challenge them. Back then, they called the Big Ten the Big Two and the Little Eight. There were actually only 10 teams in the conference, so it was mathematically correct. And Michigan and Ohio State pretty much took turns on who was going to go to the Rose Bowl every year. And then there was a gap usually to the number 3 team. And 85 was supposed to usher in a era of parity, because the scholarships would be more spread around. And to a certain extent it did. There were other factors that drove that, but the 85 scholarships was kind of a parity thing. It also helped satisfy some Title IX things where you have to come up with women's sports to complement, have the same number of opportunities for women and so forth. So I think what going to 105 might do is it may start to put that gap back between the haves and the have-nots, maybe more this time between Power 5 and Group of 5 schools that don't have the budgets to fully fund all 105. Now I'll turn it over to Bob. That I filibustered for you so you could think about it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'll speak just from a Notre Dame perspective. I think it's really bad for Notre Dame. And here's why I think it's bad for Notre Dame. When you go from 85 scholarship to essentially you can have 105 scholarship-worthy individuals that are fully funded, you have teams that are going to hoard those players. Well, the reason why it's not a terrible thing to over-recruit in a given year is because if a player realizes they're not going to play, they can just transfer. Where is Notre Dame at a decided disadvantage from other teams? It's at undergraduate transfers. Okay? So just from the schematics of it, we might lose a recruiting battle to a player that goes to
LSU,
OSU, Texas, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, whatever. We might lose that battle. And now of the, let's just say 130 other teams that don't have that player doesn't get on the field, doesn't like it there, wants to transfer. He can now go to 129 schools, but he's got to jump through 1,000 different hoops on fire to maybe come back to Notre Dame, and there isn't a clear path to be able to do that. And so I think that the undergrad transfer, we need to get really good at it, and we need to figure out how we can shorten the path of someone's interest to our being able to offer them to make that. It's going to be we're going to be at a decided disadvantage on that transfer, and we're going to have to be the best recruiting team in the country, which, I mean, we're up there, but we're not there yet.
Jeff Stevens kind of follows up on this. It's going to kind of go into effect in the 25-26 school year, but I think it might be delayed a year to give schools a chance to recruit to that. I don't know that they're recruiting right now with the thought of having these sizes, at least for football in 2025. So I wanted to address that in the follow-up. And I also wanted to put a compliment up there. Technology win for Eric. 2 flawless starts in a row. Okay, I don't want to jinx myself. Let's take that back.
To answer the question, right, of like, do we need 105 guys? So we need 105 guys. We don't need 105 scholarship guys. I mean, that's just the way it is, right? I cannot stress how much a team thrives when you have walk-ons that are living their dream on the scout team, pushing for that one game to catch the ball, run the ball, throw the ball, whatever it may be. Nate Shomus, Timmy O'Neill, Eddie O'Connell, James Bent, Mike Anello, the list goes on and on of guys who were paying full freight, having to maintain their GPA, had a dream of something other than football, and were literally just trying to get on the field one time so that they could earn their letter jacket. If you have 105 scholarship players, you now have 105 people who feel like they are owed something, and you do lose the 20, 25 examples, the bright and shining examples of when a scholarship guy like myself is like, forget this, man. I can't do it. I can't go to class another day in a row. I need a day off. And your offensive line coach can be like, look at these three guys that are electrical engineering and, science double majors. They're still at practice on time. You can go to class. Like I think you need that. I think college kids need that. And so I haven't been happy with the NCAA and a lot of these changes. This is I think a big thing done badly.
Okay, Bob, we're going to make an executive decision now between you and me. We have some agenda to get to, and I do want to give a little bit of time to recruiting at the end. Great. But I'm loving these questions. Would you mind if we kind of gave them priority over some of the stuff that we have on the agenda?
100%. I love this conversation.
Let's do that then. Okay, here we go. At the end of the year, which player leads the team in these categories? Receptions, rushing yards, TDs, tackles, and interceptions. And there was a similar question from Brian on this. I think this covers all those categories. I'll go first.
Yes.
Give Bob some time to think about it. Rushing, I'm going to go with Jeremiah Love, although I think Jadarian Price is going to be right there. Touchdowns, let's take touchdown passes out of it. So we're just talking rushing touchdowns and receiving touchdowns. I'm still going to go with Love there, but I mean, Riley Leonard may get a whole bunch of rushing touchdowns as well, but I'm going to go with Jeremiah Love. Tackles, I'm going to go with Jack Kaiser. He's been remarkably productive playing rover and not having nearly as many opportunities, and his tackles per snap is off the chart. So I think it's going to be Jack Kaiser with him moving inside to weak side linebacker. Interceptions, I'm going to go with Watts again because I think they're going to be afraid to throw Ben Morrison's way, and maybe Christian Gray or Jaden Mickey end up with it because they're thrown to the other side, and those guys are good too. But I think it's going to be Watts. And then, did I miss anything? Receptions. That's tough just because of the rotation. And Bo Collins is such a wild card. I was talking to Darren Pritchett on WSBT radio today about that because I know Marcus Freeman is very high on him. We didn't see him in the spring. He had better stats at Clemson than anybody at Notre Dame had last year. But I am going to go with Jaden Greathouse as my receptions leader. So those are my picks there.
I like it. So for rushing, I will go yards, Jeremiah Love. I also think just an overall production, I think you're going to see him catching the ball out of the backfield more, which will be exciting. Touchdowns, I do think it can go a lot of different places. I could see Jadarian Price getting some good looks. I wouldn't be surprised to see something creative for him, kind of inside the 5 a little bit, just because he runs so hard-nosed and tough. But ultimately, I think Riley Leonard's your touchdown leader. I think he'll keep the ball some, although don't sleep on Mitchell Evans. If he stays healthy, he's a big target. And if we can run the ball effectively, you can pitch it out to the tight end as well. In terms of receptions, I'm actually going to go Mitchell Evans. I think we've replenished a lot at receiver. We've grown a lot at receiver. We can spread the ball around a lot. Would love to see a standout number 1 come out and shine. But I think Mitchell Evans is going to provide a real big mismatch. And so look for him on a lot of third downs to move the sticks. And then tackles and interceptions. I'm not going against you on tackles. I think that Jack Kaiser is the guy who's going to rack him up from his position. For interceptions, it's one of three places. It's going to be your opposite side corner, like you mentioned, those guys there. And then, when I look at the depth chart, I don't see them listing free and strong safety. I see them listing left and right. I don't know if that's something that they're continuing. I haven't seen Rod Hurd an awful lot, but I think that these two safeties could feast on some games if we're getting pressure with 4 or 5 guys. I think that's what made Xavier Watts so good, is that he knew when he needed to get to a space and the ball had no other place to go, and he was always there. If you've got two safeties who can make tackles and be around the ball, those two guys could very well lead the team in interceptions.
And we know that Xavier Watts can catch because he used to be a wide receiver.
That's right.
Okay, let's see. This from Scott, and last name I'll butcher, so you're just going to be Scott. Guys, would you consider this the most complete team regarding players and coaches? I know Kelly had some. So you're only going back, I guess, to the Brian Kelly era. Certainly there were Lou Holtz teams and Ara Parsegian teams that were super, super complete and won national championships. So let's make the cutoff line
93.
Okay, 93. So the bad Lou Holtz teams are the not as good Lou Holtz teams, and then the post Lou Holtz era. I think it's going to be up there. I think that what's going to tip the completeness of it is the wide receivers and the offensive line. I'm pretty confident Riley Leonard is going to be the quarterback that we think he's going to be. So it's those other two positions. Defensively, they were 5th in total defense last year, which was the first time they had been in the top 5 since the early 80s. And I think they could be better this year. So defensively, very complete. And special teams, I think they've got really good specialists and really good return people. But I have my druthers about the offensive line. I'm not sure who I would throw in there as more complete off the top of my head, because 2012 was slanted toward the defense. Maybe the 2018 or the 2020 team. So maybe those, 2019 team was pretty balanced, but they didn't get to the playoff because of that icky game at Michigan in the rain that we still can't explain. I'll let you answer that, Bob, because you probably have a better memory than me.
Well, no, but I think it's, Scott poses a really good question, right? But the answer isn't the best team or the team that's going to win the most, but really the most complete team. And we don't know offensively. I think that when we talk about, this is the 3rd week in a row I talked about it, right? Potential means you ain't done shit yet. You know what I mean? And so we think that the ceiling for this offense, the sky could be the limit, but we're not even sure what the floor is with the offensive line mixture and how the receivers are going to mesh. And so last year we were supposed to be a good defense. We were elite, and that doesn't always happen. When you're expected to be good, sometimes there's a little bit of a sinking factor throughout the year. We just got better as the year went on. I expect our defense to be elite and to win us a couple of games that our offense just isn't clicking. I think if we can get through the first part of this year unscathed and growing in the right direction, then I do think that this will go down as one of the more complete teams that we've seen since 93. I think our recruiting has been on par with the other premier programs in the country the last 5 years. I think our retention of players has been elite the last 4 or 5 years. Our player development at key positions has been really, really good. I do think that, we have an opportunity to write a really good chapter from front to back if we can get that O-line and receiver play early in the year to be good enough to get us out with victories.
You guys are really turning in some great questions and great comments. I was reading through them while Bob was talking, so I didn't hear a word he said. Hopefully he made sense. Do players actually have trouble not looking ahead? This is from Rajon. How do you keep focus on one game at a time?
So what does it mean to have trouble looking ahead, right? You're not watching film on USC when you're playing Georgia Tech, right? Like that's not the way it's happening. But there's an intensity with which you need to prepare to make sure you're ready for the 60 minutes of game time, on the 53 yards from sideline to sideline on a Saturday. And so I think that when it says a team was looking ahead, it means that they are not emotionally or physically or mentally ready, and they're not sharp, right? So they're not prepared for the wrinkles that a team puts in. They're not quickly making adjustments. The communication from the coaches on the sideline isn't getting implemented onto the field because the team isn't 100% fully mentally there. I do think that players and teams have a difficult time being emotionally invested in every moment of a season because you naturally hear a really nice article that was written about you by Eric Hansen. And like, you think like,
I did write some nice articles about you.
Absolutely. And, and Dan Brock probably wanted you to stop. Maybe I would have been a little more locked in for him.
I wrote some nice ones about him too.
That's true. That's true. And so I think that, Rajon, that's what it means, right? Is like, how do you keep a team really like emotionally locked in? And I think you have to find the right balance of like positive and negative reinforcement. You can't just make a team run after practice every day. You can't just restart at the first period every practice. But you can sit there and reward like, hey, this practice, you guys got after it. And so here's the reward you're going to get. Or, hey, fellas, I don't make you restart drills, but we are not at the level we need to be. Let's go ahead and hit reverse and do this again. Because if you show up on Saturday like this, we're going to be down 21 before you guys even blink. And so I think that a coach really has to have their finger on the pulse of their entire team.
Okay. We have this one from We Are Not Marshall. Hey, Bob, are you required to make weight every week as a lineman on either side of the ball?
So I don't know what teams are doing now. I don't know what the strength and conditioning practices are now. I will say that in my time, yes, we had to make weight. So my responsibility during my first 3 years was to be at under a certain weight because I naturally wanted to eat more. I was a very, very large guy, and I come from a family of large guys, and I would have ballooned up if I wasn't making sure I was eating well. And we had a couple of guys that needed to do that, which meant if you're overweight, you show up early and you hop on a treadmill and you're going to burn some calories before you even go work out. We also had guys that would show up and be 3-4 pounds underweight that had to go drink a protein smoothie and, like eat a couple pieces of fruit before we had strength and conditioning. And I did not envy those. I couldn't imagine working out with the stuff that was in their stomachs. But yes, we had to maintain. We didn't do all the body fat composition and stuff throughout the year. We basically said, if you can stay within 5 pounds of this range, this is where you need to be. And so long as you can do that, we're not going to be hyper-focused. Nowadays, we have such a high focus on nutrition. We have nutritionists that work specifically with this team. I think they're much better. If I can speak on a personal note, I think they're better at promoting good nutrition without instilling really bad and mentally deficient habits of eating and disorderly eating. And so I think that they're much better now than they used to be. But we had to step on a scale every single time we walked in the facility to make sure we were in the right range.
One story I'll tell, because I think he was a teammate of yours, and his dad told me this story, but Sam Young during the season, this is before you guys had the really good training tables and the nutritionists, had trouble keeping the weight on. And some of it was this class schedule, the South Dining Hall was closed or whatever. But his dad said he was having trouble getting to the minimum. So he put a roll of quarters in his jock.
Yep. There you go.
Make weight. Had you heard that story before?
I have not heard that story, but I know, Sam was one that, his body weight needed to be more than mine because he was 4 inches taller than I was.
Right.
And so, for him, like, he'd have been walking around at 275 if he could, and so for him to be 310, 315, there are just days you don't have it, right? Like you're just not there. And so whatever you can do to get that extra half pound, there have been people who've put a lot of things in their shoes. There are people that ask someone to just kind of step on the corner of the scale behind them, anything they can do just to try and get that extra little weight. Because just that one day, they don't want to drink 3 protein shakes before they have to go run a mile. You know what I mean? They just don't want to have to do it that one day. But that was the focus that we had. Not always healthy, but we got there.
Well, I'm just glad I never asked Sam for change for $1. We better get to the recruiting because we're at 1 hour. We're going overtime, and I don't want Heather Morton mad at me. So, so we'll hit recruiting real quick here. Notre Dame went 0 for 3 with their 3 4-star receivers last week, with Tanoke Hines choosing USC, Dylan Robinson heading to Washington, but as a defensive back, and Derek Meadows committing to Brian Kelly and LSU. Notre Dame would like to add 2 more receivers to the 2 it already has. That's Jerome Bettis Jr. and Elijah Burris, preferably from the 2025 class rather than the transfer portal. The plan is to reopen the board, reevaluate the class, study film, track these guys into their senior seasons, then push out some offers and set some visits. That includes players that are already committed to other schools. So, Bob, we'll kind of do this in more lightning round fashion. Do you think Notre Dame will recover from this during this cycle?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think all of this is done. There's no signing day until a little bit later on.
Right.
And so I think that there's a big relief in telling a team that you're going to be there. And then there's a lot that can happen during a season that makes you feel like, ooh, the things that I really liked, the way I would say it is, man, I really like that coach's attitude, and the coach's attitude that I'm seeing right now is not the same that I remember. And so you start to kind of get a peek behind the curtain a little bit. And so I wouldn't doubt the fact that maybe one of these 3 ends up on Notre Dame's board again to potentially come and kind of come back. I'll also say, in Deuce we trust. He's still out there recruiting. Like I said, I tried to hold together a class in between Bob Davie and Ty Willingham, but a 4-star center doesn't have the same kind of pull as one of the top 10 quarterbacks in the country. So I think that there's still a lot of work to be done. I think Notre Dame's a really appealing place because of the direction that we're going as a program. And I think that we'll still be able to maybe pull one of these guys that we missed out on. But also, if we open things up, I think that we'll be able to get somebody that's going to be really good for Notre Dame for a long time.
Bob, you were committed to Texas A&M initially, and then you flipped to Notre Dame. Now we're in a very different era of recruiting. There was no NIL then. There was kind of barely internet. We had AOL and, was dial-up, and it took 20 minutes to load a page and so forth. So the recruiting on the internet wasn't like it is now, where every kid knows what's going on. But what happened when Notre Dame got involved? Like, when you committed to A&M, did you say, but I'm still open to other offers, or were you surprised by the Notre Dame offer? How did it come that you were able to get flipped?
Yeah, so I shut down my recruiting process whenever I committed to Texas A&M. It was my junior year. And I'll never forget Coach Greg Madison, a great defensive line coach, defensive coordinator at different places, NFL and college. He gave me a call. I didn't know that my mom had been corresponding with him, that sneaky woman, corresponding with him and telling him everything that was going on. But he called me and said, hey, I heard through the grapevine that you committed to Texas A&M. So excited for that. Really hope we see you in a bowl game in the future. You're going to have a great career. If there's anything I can do for you, you have my number. Take care. And that was it. He said goodbye. Of all the programs where people said, hey, we're still going to recruit you, we'll still invite you to things, Notre Dame was very clearly like, hey, congratulations, we don't recruit committed players. Now, he was still talking to my mom about how my process at A&M was going, but he made me feel like he respected my decision. And there were some coaching changes going on at Texas A&M. They had started selling me that they wanted me to start my freshman year. I was 17 when I graduated high school. I was 17 during week 1 of my freshman year. So here I am. My parents are having to fax paperwork in for me because I can't even sign for myself. And Texas A&M was going to want me to be playing that week 1. And that's not what I wanted for my football career. And so there were some other reasons I committed to Texas A&M. She was 5'2" and blonde at the time. Thankfully, that did not go anywhere because I met Heather, who's 5'4" and brunette, years later. But there were some things that went a different direction that caused me to just say, like, is this really where I want to be? And I said no, and I opened up my recruitment, and I made one phone call, and that was to Greg Madison. And I called him. I said, hey, listen, you showed me the utmost respect and let me know that you weren't going to pursue me anymore. You know, it's been 7-8 months. I'm opening my recruiting again. And if Notre Dame would be interested, I would love to have a conversation. And by that weekend, Bob Davie had called me. We'd scheduled a visit for the spring. And I think I actually committed before my official visit to Notre Dame. It was just, it had stuck with me. It was a dream from a long time ago. And so, I opened it back up, but it was really, I think Tom Lemming knew, like the crystal ball was that I was leaving A&M for Notre Dame, even though Notre Dame wasn't actually talking to me at that time.
Okay, we're going to kind of wrap it up with this question then. As a player, obviously you're hosting recruits, so you're somewhat engaged with it, but do you think like fans are crazy with how much they react and overreact to recruiting? And do you guys as players, are you engaged other than during the visits? Are you saying, wow, I wonder if we're going to get the number 22 linebacker from Seattle kind of thing?
So I'll answer the second part first. As a player, you are invested to a degree because you care about the program and you care about the future of that program and you want to see it continue. And you like, when you host these players, there's a semblance of like you're putting your thumbprint on that visit that might get that guy who's a part of Notre Dame forever. And so I told the story last week, right? My official visit, I hung out with Zach Giles. I spent a lot of time with Ryan Gillis, whose career was cut short, Sean Milligan. And then I'll never forget like the hour and a half I spent with Jeff Fain. And that hour and a half with Jeff Fain is why I came to Notre Dame. Wow. Now, Jeff Fain has a career that's way better than the fact that he hosted me. But like, if it wasn't, he could look and say, you know what, Bob Morton is like, I'm the reason that Bob Morton came to Notre Dame, and he could be proud of that. At least I hope he would be, right? And so as a player, you're invested in continuing the growth of a program. In terms of the craze around recruiting, I want to say, like, I understand a lot of people who are watching this now or will be watching it later are people who are pretty crazed about recruiting. And as a former player, I always want to say, like, hey, take a deep breath. Like, this isn't over, right? Like, we can recruit 3 stars and develop them and have an amazing story to tell about all this. But I will also say that the numbers play out that you have to be recruiting 5 and 4 stars to be winning at the national championship level. And so if we are serious about wanting Notre Dame to be the Notre Dame we want it to be on the national scale, the national stage, we need to be winning some of these 5 and 4 star battles. And so to that, I say, so long as it is not like affecting your mental health or your marriage, like dive in and be excited about guys that we're getting. But I would also say this, when I was being recruited, message boards were the thing, right? And I know there are still message boards and but there are still online communities. There are high school players and family members that will hear, if not the specific things that we are saying, they will hear the tone and the tenor of what the Notre Dame Nation is saying about a recruiting class or a coach or a player. We have to own the fact that we create that Notre Dame Nation culture. And I would like Notre Dame Nation at large to try and build the same culture that Marcus Freeman is, that we're going to be like laser focused on excellence in all areas and academically as well. And we are pushing for a national championship, but like we are going to do everything we can to stay on the positive side rather than always dip into the negative. And that's hard for a guy like me sometimes. Like I said, I can be on the pessimistic side of realism. But I just want Notre Dame Nation to understand that they can be a massive recruiting tool if the tone and tenor is naturally different than the other schools that are recruiting a player.
And in the interest of my physical and mental health and not having Heather Morton come to my house with a rolling pin, we are going to wrap it up here. I do want to remind you, if you want a 30-day free trial of InsideNDSports.com, use the code NDYT, if I could read it. Go to InsideNDSports.com, get into the subscribe area, and then use that code, and you'll get 30 days to try out our premium content. We really appreciate Bob. I'm going to try to talk him and Tyler into letting Bob come on some with us during the season. And I'm surprising Bob by saying that, but now he has a chance to run it by his family and see what they think at some point. We'd love to have him. And we are going to try to do a special recruiting version of Football Never Sleeps on Saturday with Tom Lemming, who Bob referenced earlier, who is he makes me look like a tech expert. So he's going to be trying to do it from his car on the road somewhere in the North Carolina mountains. So we're going to cross our fingers. But thanks, everybody, for being here. Thanks to Legacy Heating and Air. I'm one of their customers. They were actually here today doing a maintenance thing. They were awesome. And Bob, do you want to say anything in closing?
No, I listen, I've appreciated being here. I look forward to any opportunity to talk with you and or Tyler. I was thinking earlier that, you know what, there's a perfect spot, like right in between these two. We could kind of really complete the Brady Bunch thing with a bit of a pyramid and throw the three of us on a screen sometime. So I would look forward to having the opportunity to come back and talk with you guys. This is a great little family you guys got here.
Well, thanks again, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take care, guys. Go Irish.